Foundations of Amateur Radio. The other day I came across an amateur who expressed concern that someone was using a frequency set aside for repeater use with their hotspot. Band plan issues aside, and you're encouraged to send an email to cq@vk6flab.com with a link to the official band plan that applies to your DX entity. In my experience, it's not unusual for an amateur who is configuring their so-called hotspot to use such a frequency. While you might be familiar with the concept of a mobile phone hotspot, that allows you to connect a computer through your phone to the internet. In this case, we're talking about an amateur radio hotspot. Similar in that it allows you to connect through the device to the internet, but different in that this is essentially a device that connects radios to the internet. And yes, if we're being pedantic, then computers and mobile phones also have radio. Well spotted. Anyway, an amateur radio hotspot is a radio with an internet connection, and in that it's much like a modern repeater. Often they use low transmit power, have limited range within a building or vehicle, and because of that are hardly unattended. That said, if you connect a more effective antenna and an amplifier, you could make such a device into a full-blown repeater. In other words, the line between hotspot and repeater is likely in the eye of the beholder. Given that the regulator in many countries requires a license for operating a repeater, or a beacon, I wondered what the official definition of a repeater was. So I went looking. Note that this applies to Australia only, but you'll find the journey illuminating, I'm sure. The current Radio Communications License Condition Apparatus License Determination 2015 does not have either the word repeater or beacon. The new Radio Communications Amateur Station Class License 2023, which comes into effect on the 19th of February 2024, uses both repeater and beacon several times, but does not define what they are. It has an interpretation section with a note that lists both amateur repeater station and amateur beacon station and states that the regulator can define terms under Section 64(1) of its own Act. The Australian Communications and Media Authority Act of 2005, Section 64(1), states that, quote, the ACMA may make written determination defining one or more expressions used in specified instruments, being instruments that are made by the ACMA under one or more specified laws of the Commonwealth, end quote. It should come as no surprise that neither repeater nor beacon appears in this document. I then thought to go sideways and search the Register of Radio Communications Licenses for a repeater license. It reveals a PDF for a license with all manner of detail, frequencies, power levels, location, antenna type, etc., for a license, but no definition of what a repeater is. I then looked at the 481 pages of the Radio Communications Act 1992. It uses both beacon and repeater. Unfortunately, beacon is in relation to the operation of lighthouses, lightships, beacons and buoys. Repeater is in relation to two or more digital radio multiplex transmitters. I then searched through the Federal Register of Legislation for the phrase amateur beacon station. It returns 27 results, of which 9 are in force. I downloaded all 9, including any explanatory text if it was available. In all, 340 pages of legal documents. Finally, we have progress. In the Radio Communications Interpretation Determination 2015, we find the following definitions. Amateur beacon station means a station in the amateur service that is used principally for the purpose of identifying propagation conditions. Amateur repeater station means a station established at a fixed location, A, for the reception of radio signals from amateur stations, and B, for the automatic retransmission of those signals by radio. So, if your hotspot is in a vehicle, it's not a repeater, but if you have it sitting on your shack, it is. Similarly, apparently, my 10 dBm whisper transmitter, which I use solely for the purpose of identifying propagation conditions, is a beacon. Apparently, if you have your computer controlling your radio using Whisper, that's a beacon too. You can apparently apply for a license and pay the regulator for the privilege, the price of which went up by 510%, according to their own documentation, from $29 to $177. No idea if that's a once-off or an annual charge. So, now we have a situation where, apparently, the rules state that I'm not permitted to use Whisper without a beacon license. In fact, the explanatory statement to the amateur class licensing reform instruments explicitly states that, quote, subsection 13.2 prohibits the operation of an amateur station for specified purposes, including for the purpose of obtaining a financial gain or reward. The subsection also prohibits the operation of an amateur beacon station or an amateur repeater station under the amateur station's class license, and, subject to subsection 3, the transmission of an encoded signal to obscure the meaning of the signal." End quote. I've just hit send on a letter to the regulator asking for clarification. Perhaps you should write one too. I've also just switched off my Whisper transmitter, and if you're one of the 2,312 amateurs who made a Whisper transmission last year in Australia, perhaps you should too. I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima, Alpha Bravo.